Welcome everyone. If you've just joined us, my name's Mark Parry from the Leeds Civic Trust, and tonight we have a presentation on the Kirkstall Forge. Kirkstall Forge has been of industrial importance since the 12th century, contributing significantly to Leeds' reputation with close ties to the monks at Kirkstall Abbey. This was the longest continually used industrial site in the UK until it closed its doors in 2003. Over the coming years, the site will be transformed with high-quality offices, new homes, and a wealth of complementary facilities, creating a genuine and sustainably led community. Yet its heritage and importance to Leeds and the North will remain a constant influence in shaping its future. I'm glad to welcome tonight two people from the developer CEG, Lucinda Yeadon and Howard Metcalf. Will help discover the history of this unique place and its people. They will share photos, artifacts and stories from the Kirkstall Forge archive, as well as giving you a glimpse of what it will look like in the future. Later on, we'll be opening up the chat facility for people who want to ask questions. So if you look out for this appearing on the bottom of your screen, we've got 277 people tuned in so far. If you're from outside the UK, we'd also be interested to know in what country you come from as well. So over to you, Howard.
Thanks, Mark. Thanks. I think Lucinda's going to do the formal introduction, but I'll just I'll share my screen. I should probably put the apologies in for the lack of technical competency at the very outset of this evening. So yeah, there's a few glitches along the way. Please bear with us, but. Yeah, hopefully you'll find this very interesting, what we hope to be an hour and a half of insight into the history and indeed the future of Kirkstall Forge. Formal introduction bit, Lucinda.
Oh, thanks, Howard. Hi, everyone. It's really strange to be in a Zoom call and not being able to see everyone. It's probably, as there's over 200 people on the call at the moment, that's probably a good thing. So as Mark said, my name's Lucinda Yeadon and I am the Community Liaison Manager for the developers at CEG, who have kind of custodianship of Kirkstall Forge. And my wonderful, I won't say assistant because he's going to take the majority of the work today, is Howard Metcalf, who's one of our project managers on the development. Now, a lot of the time when we talk about Kirkstall Forge, we talk about the future and what is Kirkstall Forge going to look like once the homes and the offices have been developed. But today we're going to talk mainly about its past. And neither me or Howard are historians, but we are passionate about the site and we're passionate about its heritage and the importance of that, not just to Kirkstall, and Leeds, but to the UK and globally. So we just want to talk to you a little bit about that today, and we're going to try and cover how many hundreds of years, Howard, tonight?
Well, as Mark said in his introduction, it's somewhere around 800, and we hope to develop on some of the things that Mark said in that introduction. But we're about
800 years in about 1.5 hours. Yeah. So we might not go into everything in the depth that many of you might want, but we will try our best. And we'll be touching on a lot of the stories and myths and legends that have come up around Kirkstall Forge, and some of them we found to be true and some of them aren't, and sometimes it's just nice to allow legends to live as they are. But it would be great for us to explore a bit of that, as well as some of the archaeological work which our archaeologists have been doing over the lifetime of the development over the past few years, which we'll be able to update you on. So Howard.
Yes, very much, Lucinda. So yeah, here we go, a romp through 800 years. I think to sort of make it achievable and hopefully coherent and interesting, we're going to focus very much on two specific periods of time, as well as giving an overview. The first of those specific periods is around the late 1700s, when the Butler and Beecroft family arrive as custodians of the site, and we'll talk to you about how that came about and the key protagonists in the development of the site at that period of time. And then jumping forward sort of 130 odd years, we'll pick up the site in the early 1900s and the impact that the two world wars had on the people and the place. And I think the more that I've learnt about Kirkstall Forge as a non-historian, we're talking about geography here in terms of the valley, and you can see Thomas Girtin's image of the Kirkstall Valley of 1901 there in front of you, but you can't remove the people from the story. And hopefully some of the insight we give you over the next hour and a half will really allow you to get a feel for what it must have been like to live and work and be a part of the site as it's developed over the as I say, over those 800 years. So without further ado, there's a couple of timelines there.
Sorry, I'm going to, Howard, just
interject.
Something that I forgot to mention is that we are going to be sharing with you tonight photographs, but also some artifacts from the Kirkstall Forge archive, which we're compiling at the moment. And I just really want to thank particularly the Butler family, who have put many things into the Kirkstall Forge archive. And I know members of the Butler family had indicated that they might be on the call tonight. So before we went any further, we'll be stopping to them around me at home at the moment, and we'll be showing you some of those. But I just wanted to put on record our thanks to the Butler family for letting us share them.
Yes, indeed. Second those thoughts. So part of the timeline, this is a very much an overview of where we're going to take you tonight. I think we'll focus very much on that second box and the evidence or lack thereof that the forge was founded by the monks. I know that was referenced in Mark's introduction. We can explore that a little bit in this first period, but it does give you a feel for the longevity of the site and the volume of history that is attached to it. The site, currently known in modern phraseology known as Kirkstall Forge, was originally part of the monastery holdings, and that's where the association comes from. But we'll explore that a little bit more. We'll see how the custodianship of the site developed through its lifespan, through to the dissolution of the monasteries and beyond, the period from sort of 1539 up to 1779, when the Butler and Beecroft families turn up and take the site over, and run you through right up to when CEG arrived in 2003. So as we say, a lot to get through. Hopefully we make it interesting. This was a slide we pulled together to give you a feel for, again, going back to the people, key theme of the site really. And it's important to kind of reflect on the fact that, yes, the monks had custodianship of the site. Was it a forge? Was it not? We'll go into that in a moment. Before it kind of was held through various different ownerships, up to when the Crown estate took over following the dissolution of the monastery in 1539. We'll focus on some of the characters there. And as I say, major milestone is the Butler and Beecroft family, who arrive in 1779. And we'll explore particular character, Betty Beecroft, who was pivotal really in the site being picked up, taken over by the Butlers and Beecroft in that period. And then we'll take you through some of the later history. And I'm very confident that some of the people on the as part of the presentation tonight, listening to the presentation, will be very familiar with some of those later stages and later years, having had family or probably direct involvement in the forge during its later period. So there's a very early plan of the forge. That plan shows you the location of the forge, 3.5 miles to the northwest of Leeds city centre. And for those of you who don't know Kirkstall, there's a long history of continuous development along the valley. We're hoping to provide a bit of a window on the evolution of ironwork and steelworking in Leeds. It was a really significant industrial site, and grew from a fairly simple forge to a major industrial working through its lifespan, manufacturing a variety of products, and really sort of partnered with the development of the textile, coal, engineering and transport industries in Leeds and further afield, and became a very significant site globally. Aided its growth was its geography, its position in the valley. We had the water obviously provided by the River Aire, and provided the power in the early days of the forge up until the 1830s. But you've also got proximity of local resources, coal, timber, iron ore, all the things that you'd need really to have a successful forge. They were manipulated, all of these natural resources, the development of things like the mill race that ran from Cowbeck through the north of the site, and also, as I've alluded to, proximity to the woodland in the Kirkstall Valley, and then latterly you've got location and proximity to major transport links. So the Leeds-Liverpool Canal, which you can just see to the south of the slide there, and latterly the railway line running up the Aire Valley, which all gave the site its kind of commercial advantage, or added to that. Just flick on the side. So the early period of the site, we're talking here from the 1200s, and this is where we really investigate that claim really that the site partnered the Cistercian monks. There's JMW Turner's image of the abbey, which gives you a bit of context, but also again promotes the significance of the valley, indeed the abbey in Kirkstall. As I say, there was a suggestion that the forge accompanied the monks, the Cistercian monks, from circa AD 1200, and there's some monastic foundation to the forge. It's been questioned, that claim, fairly fervently, and the evidence is fairly thin on the ground. What we can say with certainty is that the monastic holdings, and there you can see the network that was associated with the abbey, kind of spanned far and wide through the Aire Valley, Upper Aire Valley, and across over to areas of Lancashire, Bessaker, in South Yorkshire, and they all had partnerships with the abbey grounds themselves. What we can also say within the forge, as I've alluded to, were substantial water management features, the mill race, and that fed a corn mill that was believed to have been on the site. You can just see it on the south of the abbey, further down the valley from where Kirkstall Forge is. But again, a demonstration of the industry that was taking place in the area at the time. And there is some documentary evidence of deposited coal and charcoal slag within the abbey grounds themselves, included copper and bronze smelting and some iron founding that was associated with the abbey itself. So the suggestion that there was some small scale, and it's very small scale production. I mean, you have to ask yourself how they constructed the abbey without having close proximity to some sort of, maintenance and construction support, really, to build a building of that size and scale. And that really is the hard evidence for the association of the forge with its origins being in and around that period of the 1200s. As I say, lots of documentary evidence to refute that. Certainly reference to the abbey holdings having access to coal and timber within the Bramley area, and there was almost certainly some forging happening to the northwest of Leeds, that the abbey construction benefited from, and we think that's where the majority of the industrial action took place, rather than on the site that we now know as Kirkstall Forge. That clarifies hopefully one of the myths that are associated with the forge itself. We jump now to the post-medieval period, 1539 to 1779. Significance of 1539, as I've referenced, is the dissolution of the monasteries. At this period, the forge itself was handed through a number of leases, so the monks themselves weren't in control of that area. and a significant amount of the land that we now know as Kirkstall Forge is used as farming. There's some corn milling activity locally. We believe there's some evidence that the river itself is used for cleaning wool as part of the sort of textile industry, immediately preceding the sort of post-medieval period we'll jump to now. And the reason I'm going to dwell on this, and again coming back to the people associated with the site, is because of this gentleman here. Again, picking up on the myths and legends tome that we set at the beginning of the presentation. This gentleman is Thomas Kramner. Thomas Kramner was the Archbishop of Canterbury, and during the dissolution of the monasteries, he fell on the wrong side, really, of Edward VI, and this is fact. He was executed by being burnt at the stake in 1556. Although it's unlikely he ever visited site, his association with the site was that he was custodian of the site in that period immediately after the dissolution of the monasteries between 1539 and his death in 1556. So yeah, ownership of the site, vacant landlord, you might say, and a really gory end. But again, brings you back to the significance of this part of Leeds, obviously predominantly brought about by way of the Abbey's location there. But we like to ride on the back of those coattails, given our close relationship with the Abbey. And there's the first map, or should I say a recreation of the first map of the site, that dates from 1711. That's Joseph Dickinson's map, and he was the representative of the early Cardigans estate. And you can see there, it's a much broader map than Kirkstall Forge itself, but you can see from the kink in the River Aire, that's where the forge is. There's a number of buildings to be located there. And although initially the operation would have been very small scale and very much a cottage industry type smelting, in the early 1700s, forging practice would have been very low scale, low fi. Nonetheless, you can start to see the beginnings of what becomes the Kirkstall Forge in a wider sense. And I think that map's really, or representation of the map, is really important because it gives you the interrelationship with the forge and everything else that's happening on around it. And that is something that remains in evidence throughout the forge's existence. There's several different management operations in place at this time. Lots of changes of ownership, which demonstrate that the forging was potentially profitable, attractive industry to get into, but also precarious, and mainly precarious because of the nature of early industry, but also your availability of natural resources that you're reliant upon to have a profitable commercial concern. And again, something we come back to time and time again through the story of the forge is how often those early characteristics of the forge and forging industry there kind of come back time after time, availability of natural resources being one of them, and the uncertainty of the wider economy in the industrial world and how that plays into the affairs of the forge. I should say just before this, 1690 is the first documented evidence that the site becomes known as Kirkstall Forge. So we've made a big leap from 1210 up to 1690, when you really start to see, you know, absolute and definite industrial activity on the site. Jump forward a little bit more, again skipping through the years. 1779 gives you a bit more of a feel of the site. You can see that kink in the River Aire, and the canal, the newly completed canal at that stage, just in the bottom right hand corner. Obviously the industrial facility at the end of the dam, so again hydropower. They've used the natural geography and availability of natural resource to provide that hydrological power, and power in the slitting mill. Also the proximity of the residential units on the site, the houses that surround in very close proximity to the industrial facility that's there. And now we get into the real action, if you will. And this is when the site really comes to life for me. So that's an etching of the Leeds-Liverpool Canal. It's not the forge, it's somewhere in close proximity, but again, we'll give you a feel for what it was to be in close association with the forge at that point in time. Heavy industry would have been quite a dark and imposing place, but mixed in with, again, very close proximity to other industrial activities. You can see the quarry in the background of that etching, and again, that was very true to life down at Kirkstall Forge. In 1779, as I say, is important because that's when the Butler and Beecroft families arrive, and they remain the custodians of the site through the peaks and troughs of the next 250 years, more or less. They acquire the site from the Crown Estate. They introduce steam power in the 1830s, and they really oversee the most successful period of the forge. That gentleman in front of you there is Thomas Butler. He was one of the triumvirate of individuals who were responsible for bringing the forge into the Butler and Beecroft family, initially leased from the Earl of Cardigan's estate, but nonetheless they start to take the interest. That's George Beecroft, and that's George's wife Betty. And it's Betty we're going to focus on for the next little bit of the introduction. Lucinda, feel free to chip in if you feel.
Oh, I love Betty. Betty is my favourite character when it comes to Kirkstall Forge, so I'm very biased when it comes to Betty. But you carry on about Betty. I'll jump in occasionally.
You jump in. You put me on the right track. I think part of the attraction of Betty, from a sort of historical, a bit of myths and legends, but actual fact perspective is, from my personal perspective, is very much the fact that for a female at that time to have been responsible really for leading the two families into taking on the lease of the forge was some feat, really. Clearly very courageous. I'm assuming fairly forthright individual. There's some great stories which I'll elaborate on in a second, but remarkable woman in lots of respects. Put it in a bit of context, obviously this period of time is huge in terms of industrial revolution. You've got the Shropshire's Iron Bridge that was constructed in 1779, so around the same sort of period. And the Butler and Beecroft family clearly identify the opportunity that getting involved in the production of iron, latterly steel, would present, and weren't put off by the fact that as families, I mean, the Beecrofts were to press fairly small scale farmers, also involved in the wholesale of bacon and butter, based in Bramley, so just over the valley. The Butlers, on the other hand, were wool traders, industry we referenced earlier, but really no industrial forbearance, no industrial expertise. They come into this afresh, which I think tells you a lot about society at the time. But almost as remarkable is the fact that Betty, as a lady, leads the charge for the families to get involved in taking on the forge and taking on the new business opportunity.
Sorry, so the legend is that Betty recognised the potential of Kirkstall Forge, and that it perhaps wasn't meeting the potential that was there. So, having spoken to our family and encouraging them to go for this business deal, Betty got on a horse, rode to where the Crown's representatives were, and negotiated the deal to take on Kirkstall Forge, which I think for a woman in the 1700s was probably seen as quite a remarkable thing, and I think she is somebody who we recognise as one of the kind of great powers and leaders behind what became of Kirkstall Forge. Is that right, Howard?
Yeah, that's right. There's a bit of conjecture as to whether she got on the horse and rode to see the Earl of Cardigan's or Lord Cardigan's representative, or did she force her husband there to do it? But either way, she was definitely the.
I like to think she did it, but you know.
Absolutely, absolutely, and we'll never know either way. So, but yeah, absolutely, the catalyst for driving the families to taking on the responsibility for the forge, and she indeed led the negotiations with the Crown's representative, such that by October 1778. They've signed the lease and they're now responsible for the forge. You do wonder, coming from bacon and butter and wool trading, they must have sat there on day one and thought, right, what do we do now? But there we go. They saw the opportunity. I think running up to this period, the forge was fairly profitable in the sort of late 1600s, but had undergone a period of underinvestment and was almost in a state of dilapidation by the time the Butlers and Beecrofts turned up. So really took a bit of foresight to see the opportunity that was there, but the opportunity nonetheless was there, and they were in prime position to take advantage of it. As I say, very forthright individual, clearly strong-willed, and evidence of that we have by way of Elizabeth Beecroft, to give her a formal name, her letter to the Leeds Mercury. We have to remember that this is a time when we were at war with France. So this is just after they've taken on the forge and still maintained their interest in butter and bacon. But she's clearly been accused there of having sold aforementioned bacon and butter to the French. How dare she? Nonetheless, she refutes that allegation. And not only should she refute that allegation, she's fairly threatening in chasing down the malicious and false reports which have been given in her dishonour, and provides a reward of 10 guineas to anyone who can provide a witness or any such information that leads to a conviction. So she's very protective of her name, and rightfully so. So that's hard-written evidence of the nature of the lady.
You don't want to get on the wrong side of Betty.
No, definitely not. Definitely not.
How would you want to share the story about Betty's house?
Yeah, so we'll do, absolutely. So during the period of the early period of the Butler and Beecroft families taking over the site, there's significant investment, and we start to see real kind of change in the site itself. Just jump back to that plan of 1779. One of the things they do, George, Betty's wife, was often criticised for being fairly lazy. There's some documentary evidence of him being, one who enjoys putting his feet up, should we put it that way. Clearly frustrates Betty. One of the things he did do, however, was build the family home. And you can just see George Beecroft's house identified on that plan from 1779, so just after they'd taken on the site. The story goes that George, not only being one who enjoys putting his feet up in front of the fire, also enjoyed a drink. And Betty was teetotaler, so she didn't drink. George has obviously been out at the local hostelry one evening, comes home fairly well oiled, shall we say. There's a set to, a bit of an argument. I can certainly relate to that. The argument clearly escalates fairly quickly, such that the rumour had it that the house got burnt down. Now, we were told this story when our archaeological investigation was taking place on site, and I listened and I thought, that's not true, that can't be true. So pie in the sky, until the archaeologists were excavating in the area where we've got the house identified on the plan there, and we started to find lots of charred timbers of a house which clearly stood there some time ago. And it's at that point you start to wonder whether some of the rumours are actually true about Betty. So yeah, certainly personally now, I believe all of that story. It's part of the myth and legend that associates the site. So as Lucinda says, don't mess with Betty, is the moral of that tale. Back to the presentation, just to give you an insight as to the levels of development that were going on at the site at this time. The site between the early 1600s and 1779, which you can kind of see there, changes very little other than the development of some residential properties around the industrial site. Source of power is the same. Footprint of the industrial units is pretty much the same. What changes between 1779 and some 35 years later there in 1816, you can see the density of the development, how much more established the square has become, some additional residential properties, gardens. So it's really taken on a whole new dynamic, the site. It's a much more developed place, which represents, yes, the improved fortunes of the site, but also the level of investment that the Butler and Beecroft families had seen to input to the place. Just to give you a bit more of a feel, there's a representation of the site in and around that same period, so just before 1830. That's a model of the site, looking from the south, sort of Bramley Falls Wood area, across the valley. And one of the areas that they focused on, and this is a modern photograph, was what we call the lower and upper forge. So this is the lower forge, and that still stands to this day and will be retained as part of the future development of the site. 1880s, this was significantly redevelopment, again, as part of that investment from the Butler and Beecroft family. And I just thought it'd be interesting to show you inside this building. And what was housed in here, and these are obviously modern pictures taken in the last few years. What was housed in here initially was the Slitting Mill, which was developed in the early 1600s and carried through, allowed a much more quicker, precise production of iron bar that was mainly ultimately turned into nails and pins for textile industry. The Slitting Mill would have sit in here. Latterly, and we found some archaeological evidence of this, one of the major industrial developments that Butler and Beecroft brought to the site was a process called pulling, which is a way of smelting wrought iron to get a much purer product. And there was a number of new buildings constructed just to the south of the building that we're looking in at the moment, that would have housed the puddling furnaces. As I say, allowed the site to take advantage of the commercial advantage that gave them in providing a much purer, stronger, more versatile product. I should say the two hammers in those pictures are not representative of how that building would have looked in that late 1700s, early 1800s period. They're later additions that were brought in when this area, and anyone who worked down there will tell you, became a museum effectively. I'll just flick through a few of these so you can get a feel for what this area is. The underslung hydrological power system, so a wheel that turns from the powered by it from the dam immediately outside this building. Water would have turned that to lift the hammers. And a few more images of the industrial infrastructure that's been left behind, and we will retain and use as part of the future development of the site. Just finishing on the Butlers and Beecrofts then. There's the Butler and Beecroft family tree, which you've got George and Betty up in the top corner. And then you can see kind of how that flushes through to the 1920s, 1930s. And that continuation of their interest and involvement in the forge. One of the important characters in all of that is John's son, John Butler's son, Thomas Butler the diarist, and there is Thomas Butler the diarist. I suppose the reason it's so synonymous is for anyone who likes their literary history, I'm just going to try something now. This was a copy of Thomas Butler's diary. And this is just a flick to a few pages, obviously a reproduction from the early 1900s of Thomas Butler's diary. This is a bookbinder's edition, so not all the pages are separated actually, but really gives you an insight into the prominence of the forge at that time. He retells stories of going up to Clitheroe, takes him 5 days to get there on his horse and cart. Has a number of scrapes along the way in, again, hostelries, which is a recurring theme of this tale. I should say it's not him who has the scrapes. He's just a witness on this occasion. But he goes on research and development expeditions across the north of the UK and beyond, Wales and southwest, to see what other industrial units are doing at that stage, and brings back a lot of those lessons. And there's, again, a recurring theme of that ability to look elsewhere and see what other people are doing, and bringing back the effective practice that they're seeing across the industrial manufacturing world back to the site. Just developing that a bit more in terms of what the site would have looked and felt like. There's an image of what they call the partners' houses. They still stand to this day, and again, we're going to be taking those forward as part of the future development works. I think I've just lost my reference for that one, but I believe that picture dates from the early 1800s. There's an etching of the site there. Obviously, the buildings now look significantly different to that, following phases of redevelopment when the forge was still active. And just picking up on that, evidence of the fact that the investment that they're making, we now jump to 1838, very densely populated site, a lot more industrial manufacturing going on. Still making fairly small scale things up to this point. So we're not making huge industrial tools, equipment up to the 1830s. The big change around 1835 is when gas power is brought to site. So we switch from hydrological power to gas. At the same time, there's a shift in the emphasis of the site. There's considerable transformation at the forge. And it's a period when British industry was changing rapidly. Yes, on the back of the advent of steam power, but also other industrial activities which are kind of going through a revolution. What the provision of sort of continuous controlled power supply as the less continuous and less certain power supply from water is that they're able to expand their ability to produce finished products. So not just raw iron products effectively, but produce extra value, extra output, and really gain, again, commercial advantage from the value added products that they're developing at that stage. And as a result of that ability to provide finished products, there's a massive expansion, yes, through England, through Britain at that stage, but also internationally. And that builds on a theme of globalization that the forge has always had, yes, reliant on its local geography and the proximity to resources and transport links, but forever bringing in resources from abroad. And there's documentary evidence from the late 1700s of pig iron have been brought from Holland, from the USA. So as long ago as that, they're still looking abroad to bring certainty to their sort of production techniques as such. Obviously, 1777 was the Leeds-Liverpool Canal. The Leeds-Bradford Railway kind of supersedes that in 1845. So fortunate from the Forge perspective. That railway line goes immediately past their back door. They're able to take advantage of that. There's a direct connection, obviously, to Leeds and Bradford and beyond. The complexity of the rail network that they're able to gain advantage of. So just beyond that picture in front of you, 1838, between sort of then up to 1878, again, there's another, on the back of that commercial success, another period of expansion and construction of much larger purpose-built facilities. There's a lot of demolition of the buildings you can see on the plan in front of you there that takes place. And they are replaced with these larger facilities that enable them to start manufacturing much larger items. And we're talking about things like cranes, crane bases, parts for steam engines, and products for the railway industry. So not only has the Forge benefited from proximity to the railway, they're now supplying that industry and gaining commercial advantage by way of that. There's a lot more modernisation of the processes at that stage. Again, you're getting into finishes products, so there's a lot more finesse and focus on the detail that goes into a finished product. And again, that's a catalyst for the emergence of the techniques, education and trades on the site during this kind of middle 1800s period up to 1878. What that means is they have to bring into play a load of rules for the workforce on the site, and indeed lots of incentivization. So along with the fines for being late and along with the fines for drinking beer on the site, you also get bonuses started to be brought in, and we've got some documents that demonstrate this. So rules and regulations, but also incentives. Sick pay is one thing that's brought in. You get 1 penny per week from contributed to the Sick Society, and the Sick Society pay sick pay of up to between 4 and 8 shillings for up to 28 weeks of sick leave that's taken. So you start again, you could go on about the social evolution which has accompanied the site, but that's just one demonstration of the science development which feeds into wider social and economic impacts.
I was going to come in and say we've got an original price list from 1879, which I've just got here. I don't know if that shows up on the camera.
Oh, yeah,
probably quite small. So yeah, so this is part of the archives that we've got at Kirkstall Forge. Trying to find the camera, there we go. And it's an original price list for patent rolled shafting. I don't know what that is, but you know. So we are keeping as many of the documents as safely as we can at the moment. So there you go. So that's at this point of history.
Brilliant. Thanks, Lucinda. To add to that, I should say the sick pay and the Butlers noted at this stage the sick pay didn't cover any illness or injury that was a resultant from drunkenness and fighting on the site. So if you were drunk and got in a brawl on the site, I'm afraid your sick pay wasn't covered, which I think again tells you a little bit about what it was like to be on the site at that time.
Sorry, Howard, I was just going to share as well. This is a little bit earlier, this document that we've got.
Yeah.
But it's a particular favourite of mine. It's a wanted poster from, I think the date is 1816. And it's a wanted poster for somebody who broke into the counting house at Kirkstall Forge. So if any of you've got any information about that, there's a 20 guineas reward. And if you can just let the Messrs Beecroft and Heath know, then that reward is yours. I think there's an open line from Crime Watch. But this was a particular favourite, and I daredn't take it out of this frame because obviously it's considerably old.
Are we absolutely certain that reward's not been claimed?
I'm not sure. I think it's still an open case.
Okay.
I'll do a podcast on it.
Brilliant stuff. Just final plan. I know I bombarded the plans a little bit. There's Seeds, famous sort of cartographer of the period, turns up in the 1830s and produces two plans of the site, which that's the 1838 plan of Seeds, and then that Seeds plan of 1844. And again, just looking at that, you can quite quickly see the change that's come about in a very short period of time with the density of construction and development around the site. What in 1838 is gardens and a square, it quite quickly turns into a fairly densely populated part of the site. And then to the north of the river, the dam, sorry, what is a fairly sparsely populated industrial area becomes very densely populated. It shows you all you need to know about the site in terms of their aspiration and their level of activity that was going on at the site at that time. What you'll notice on the later 1844 plan is the gasworks in the top left-hand corner. Gas introduced to site, as I say, in 1835, which was relatively late in some respects. It had been brought into other sites in the UK much sooner than that, much more quickly. But nonetheless, it's still fairly cutting-edge technology at that stage. And as I've alluded to, brings about a real kind of industrial advantage for the forging activity on the site. Still got Turnpike Road to the kind of northeast there, which obviously lastly becomes the A65. And that's a representation of some of the things they were making. So that's the crane base, famous crane base, still retained on the site, and we're looking to preserve this, do something with it. If there's any budding railway volunteers out there who could lend us a hand, leave me your details at the end of this, because yeah, this is going to be brought back to life. That was made in 1865 and was exported to the Isle of Wight Rail Company. It stayed in the Isle of Wight on the docks there, we believe, serving the dock logistics industry until it was returned to the Kirkstall Forge in 1965, so 100 years later. And we're told it was for twice the price that they'd originally received for it. So they made a loss on that one, but I think it was for very good reason that was brought back to the site. Here's a few other pieces of evidence of what they made on the site. There's some hand tools that we've recovered as part of the archaeological dig. We do have a much more interesting archive of this, but it's been properly archived and locked away at the moment, so I couldn't get to that. But it does give you a demonstration of some of the intricacy of what was being made down there, the skill and craftsmanship that was there. These will be, again, from the early 1800s, hand tools that were being manufactured down on the site. Some photographs thereof. Later image, I'm having a guess at somewhere in the mid-1900s here, but lots of axles. Yes, trains, when trains came around in the mid-1800s, providing that industry with parts. But when that's again superseded and development takes on and road transport really takes off, those of you who worked down there, had any association with those who worked down there, will know that one of its great claims to fame is its ability to produce and supply axles, particularly axles for heavy goods vehicles, buses, etc. And there's an image of a holding warehouse with some of those axles in. Likewise, another image of an internal industrial facility. As I say, as we're getting through to the mid-1900s here, but demonstration of what they would have made down there. Somebody inspecting some steel. Important part of the job. And there it is, this association with transport, which really puts the site where it needs to be commercially through the early middle part of the 1900s and beyond. We believe there are still images online of trains running in the Indian subcontinent with Kirkstall Forge parts, providing the transport infrastructure out there.
We've got an example here of one of the brochures. So, I mean, I think doesn't have the date on this, but the telephone number is Horsforth 81264, and they've got 3 lines. So it kind of puts that in at a point of time, and it really kind of shows how the axle was really the key part of the business of the forge at this time. So.
Lovely, thanks, Lucinda. So we've got to a fairly good stopping point in terms of getting you up to speed. I think, just in summary, in terms of the Butler and Beecroft families and their custodianship of the site, which I should say continues beyond the period of the war. They're still in control of the site at this stage. I think characterised very much by some ups and downs through the period. The period sort of beyond 1848 up to the early 1900s was largely one of prosperity and expansion, as you can see from some of the plans that we've looked at. New products being developed, new steam hammers, steam presses, larger engineering products, and again bridges and cranes, as we've seen, they're all being developed on the site. And then as a result of that, the firm remained a successful producer of those products, of steel and iron products through that period. There's lots of investment. Sometimes they push the investment a little bit too far. There's some tensions within the management of the site during the period, that too much is being invested and not enough kind of being banked for a rainy day. Divergent views on that. There's fairly extensive documentary evidence on that. Up to the, as I say, 1778, pressures around that really come to bear, and as a result, the kind of affairs, the profitability of the site really curtails and reduces. And on all those sales were still quite strong through the 1870s, 1860s, 1870s. They do start to fall away through that later 1870s period up to the early 1900s, albeit the site is still a success, still seen to be profitable, a solid business. It's kind of well respected locally, nationally and internationally, and has maintained that kind of name through the kind of 130, 140 years from when Betty George and Thomas first turned up to take custodian of the site on. So that brings us up to, there's a few more slides here of what the site would have been like. Again, 1930s era. There's the old internal railway that would have worked on the site. Some fairly scary stories about that. So not only was the Leeds Bradford railway line providing a route in and out of the site, the railways actually extended into the site, and they used railway infrastructure to carry goods around the site as part of the manufacturing processing, really, in lieu of more modern cranes and such like. So brought you up to speed with up to the war period, really, the First World War, and albeit partway through the war. That's a plan of the site in 1917, and again, he made that big leap in the density and level of development that's taken place on the site. We've still got the dam though, so that's still there. And that's in the Second World War. So you can see between the two wars that activity development continues apace, and there's a much more focused, coherent sort of production process that starts to take place on the site during that period. Do you want to do some of the archives on the First World War, Lucinda?
First World War, absolutely. And it would actually be the Boer War where the Kirkstall Forge first started manufacturing axles for the military, and then very much the First World War. As I mentioned, the Butler family has been incredibly generous in sharing some of their family's artifacts with us. And one of them, which I've got here, is the war diary of Basil Butler. Now, hopefully you'll be able to see, this is Basil, Major Basil Butler. And this is the actual original diary which he wrote in the trenches, which, you know, it's an absolute privilege really for me to be holding it here in 2021 in my conservatory in Kirkstall. But it really shows how much the family of the forge, as well as the forge itself, kind of contributed to that point. And I've got some photographs here that came with the diary of Basil in the trenches, which I will hopefully show you. Hopefully see. Now Basil survived the war and came back to Kirkstall and was acted as one of the directors well into the 1940s. So you know, it's like I said, it's quite a privilege to be able to share these and also to be trusted to look after them. So other archives that we have got is I know Howard mentioned earlier that there were fines brought in for workers drinking and drunkenly behaviour. But I do have this invoice for a shipment of wine, which was for the directors, and that came from Bordeaux in 1875, which I think, you know, people after my own heart. I'm not sure how many bottles they'd have got for this, but again, it's something that we'll be keeping safe and finding a way to share with people in the future. Okay, Howard, do you want to move on to the Second World War?
Yeah, we can do. I got embroiled in answering a few of the queries on chat there. So
how are you? Okay, multitasking. That's very good.
I'm doing my best. I'm doing. If you talk to my wife, she'll tell you I'm an expert at multitasking.
Yeah, okay.
Or maybe not. Yes, we'll continue. We'll continue on this. I think just to add, actually, one day that we skipped over, very remiss of me, was actually the fact that the site itself is taken into private ownership for its first time in the 1890s, when Edmund Butler opened negotiations with the Cardigan estate and completes the purchase of the site. So it completes the journey that Betty, George and Thomas had set out on all those years earlier, some 100 years earlier. So yeah, it's a significant date in the life cycle of the site itself. And possession is finally taken on in February 1893. And as I said, that really is a milestone for the site coming into private ownership. But also, once more, they've taken on the site is the catalyst for improved fortunes from the site from the 1890s, and a lot of that was based on again coming back to the war, was the Franco-Prussian War, which had kind of seen the site in good stead through the 1860s. It profitability had fallen away. As war then returns, with things like the Boer War, the fares of the site improve. So yeah, get a recurring theme as we keep coming back to it in reference to the site. So there's the site during the Second World War. That's a plan in the late, just after the Second World War, so late 1940s plan. As I say, lots of significant developments shown on there, and most significant of those developments is the South Bank Workshop. So for the first time, the site has expanded to the south of the River Aire. This was actually an area that was requisitioned by the Royal Services Division. So they, as part of the war effort during the Second World War, this is come to site and yeah, commandeer that area of the land, clearly riding on the expertise and availability of production facilities on the site in order to support that war effort. It's slightly out of sync. Here's a war service medal that was awarded during the First World War, so we jumped back there, apologies about that. My slide's slightly out of order of chronology, but that was a site that was presented to employees of the site. This is one individual who worked for Kirkstall Forge Company Limited and was a war services badge, as I say. And there would have been many of those given out to those individuals who served in the war during the First World War. Jumping forward to the Second World War, and still there to this day. Go on, Lucinda, are you going to say something?
Both of the wars, I noticed a question on the chat, which was about, well, what kind of war work did they do? And my understanding is that they were a big producer of axles for military vehicles.
Yeah, absolutely. Axles, munitions cases, not bombs themselves. So that is a bit of an urban myth around the site. They didn't actually produce any munitions on the site. You're kind of heading out towards Barnbow to find that industrial processing going on. But yeah, absolutely. Vehicles, keep going back to transport, another recurring theme of the site. And absolutely one of the massive commercial benefits that the site benefited from was the provision of vehicles to the army, to the British Army. So trucks, lorries, etc., parts thereof that they would have provided and clearly, you know, kind of benefited from in a commercial sense. So that is, just for completeness on that image in front of you, is one of the loopholes, again, still exists. So July 1940, there's an order made to protect the site, and they not only produce their own version of the Home Guard, but also construct a number of pillboxes. Anyone who's familiar with the A65 Abbey Road, there are some elevated brick buildings that sit above the boundary wall of the site that hold some pillboxes where sentry guards would have stood. This is one that's actually at the eastern entrance of the site, and again, you would have had an individual stand behind there with a gun, and rumour has it that sometimes that gun was wooden. So what they would have done had the German army arrived at the doorstep, Lord only knows, but I don't think would have been stand and defend themselves very readily, because yeah, I'm not sure they were given the tools to do the job effectively.
So if the tank came down the A65, there'd have been a bit of trouble.
Yeah, I was thinking there would have been. Yeah, I think absolutely they would.
What I guess what a theme during the war years, not just at Kirkstall Forge, but at many industrial places, is that more women were engaged in the work there. And I think a canteen was also built around this period. And again, I heard a story, and I don't know, Howard, if you've heard it as well, is that in the canteen, people who lived in the local area would be able to go there and they'd get fed as well, which I'd really like to think that was true. But
yes.
The story about the Home Guard, it was just brilliant. I think it was it was seen as one of the most successful home guards in Leeds at the time. I think they had something like 350 volunteers signed up, and 30 of those were women, which is great. And here we've got a picture. If you can identify your great grandparents from that picture, you're better than me.
But do let us know if you think they were associated with the site. We're forever welcoming any insight that you can give us as to the individuals who are down there, because you feel kind of duty bound really to learn as much as you can about the people who've made this site what it is today.
We've also had members of the community come and share photographs that they've got, and Kirkstall Forge had their own entertainment troupe, and I've got some photographs or copies of photographs of the different shows that they would put on at Christmas, and to keep up morale, particularly around the war years. So if anybody has anything like that they'd like to share with us, we'd really love to see it and maybe take some copies as well.
Yeah, absolutely. So yeah, as Lucinda says, not only in the Home Guard but in the workforce themselves, for both wars, First and Second World War, and bring about a real growth, I suppose, in the use of females in the workforce on the site. Clearly, traditionally, very kind of male-centered workforce, and that starts to change. There's other changes on the site, kind of in those sort of intervening years between the two wars. I've referenced the dam was still there, so that one of the questions in the chat was around the dam. Is it still there? The dam's gone. It was infilled in 1919, obviously wholly replaced then by a mixture of gas and electrical power. You've also got the end of production of wrought iron after sort of 300 years or more, in 1920, replaced by focus on steel, mild steel predominantly, in the use and development of axles. So demise of water power, iron production's kind of gone, and the kind of two milestones which mark the end of an era in the forge, and that's something we'll come back to through the next sort of period of the site. It's fair to say in the intervening years between the First and Second World War, the fortunes of the site fluctuate greatly. Again, they seem to benefit when there are periods of war. As soon as the First World War is finished, there's a ready availability of trucks that once were used by the forces in serving the war and no longer needed, and they come onto the market and flood the market. And as a result, some of the new products that the forge were making are kind of no longer wanted, and so there's a bit of a downturn between the wars. That's quickly recovered during the Second World War, as I alluded to, when they start supplying the forces again. The area's kind of commandeered for production of infrastructure and products for use in the war. But they become really famous for production of brakes during this time as well. Part of the R&D, in commercial advantage that's sought, they invest a lot into the production of brakes, and that again sets them in fairly good stead. Front wheeled axle brakes was kind of the thing that set them apart from other similar facilities at that time. So I just skip past a couple of slides there. So still Second World War here. These were badges that were presented to members of the workforce on the site to denote what they did during that period. So you can see there, if you had a gold and dark blue badge, you were an ordinary, whatever that means, and various different categories of individual who were all given specific roles as part of the war effort. Clearly the site...
The security on site at the time was very, obviously, very sensitive, and there was very strong security. So I believe that everybody who came on site had to have a pass to be able to get in, and there was certainly a lot of concern around spies and people accessing and sabotage of the site at that time. So there was a lot of security that was put in place, and I think these badges also kind of brought a sense of security there as well, so everybody knows what everybody did.
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. Clearly the site was of interest to anyone who wanted to disrupt the British Allies war effort, and indeed the site was bombed infamously and tragically to some extent in August 1940. I beg your pardon, in August 1942, August 27th, 1942. And we have, I hope Meryl's on the presentation this evening, but we, by way of a local resident, got a first-hand account, individual called George Hodgson. George is the gentleman, I believe, on the right-hand side of that picture with the pocket watch. I'll explain more about that picture in a second. But nonetheless, George, aside from being manager of the toolbar at the steelworks at that stage, and later a director and board member of the forge company, he was also captain of the local fire guard, and his recollections of the evening sort of tell the story, which again tragically resulted in 5 deaths and 11 serious injuries. He sort of recounts the fact that he awoke to strange humming sound in the valley. Initially thought it would be the kind of British Air Force patrolling. Clearly this hung around for a while, which raised his suspicions, and his recollections of the evening give quite a telling insight really into the chaos which ensued once the bombs were dropped along what is now kind of Hawksworth Wood Road, the Hawksworth Wood area, and then into the site, clearly a target because of the fact that they were producing parts for the war effort. So yeah, it's a very kind of emotive telling of the tale that again is one of the darker aspects, I suppose, to what is otherwise an intriguing story around the Kirkstall Forge's history. Just in advance of this, as Lucinda was saying, there was the local defence force set up in May 1940, and they were attached to the 9th Battalion, and who were responsible for patrolling the Kirkstall Forge. And there's again recollections of training exercises, including live ammunition exercises at Golden Acre Park, which again, for anyone who lives locally will know that area. So that picture in front of you, with George in it, later board member, and no doubt other members of the board there of the Kirkstall Forge company, is a visit by Her Royal Highness the Princess Royal, who visits the site on the 23rd of February 1943, and presented the site with an award for service during the war. So retaining that significance nationally, internationally, which again, recurring theme throughout the history of this site. Again, another kind of moment which makes you reflect. That's the war memorial that we have in the archives, that records the names of the individuals who lost their lives in the Second World War. Do you want to mention the war memorial?
Yeah, I will. The connection between Kirkstall Forge and particularly Hawksworth Wood in the area is incredibly strong, and I live in Hawksworth Wood, and I know there are some people on the call tonight who live there, and many people who live in this area worked at Kirkstall Forge, or their families worked at Kirkstall Forge. So a group of the community started campaigning to get a war memorial put onto the estate a number of years ago, and using the research of a lady who lived on the estate all alive, Margaret Rawnsley, who's now moved away. and we were pleased to help sponsor the war memorial, and that was put in place outside the co-op on Broadway in Hawksworth Wood, which not only pays tribute to those in the area who've been lost in conflict since the First World War to modern day conflict, but also commemorates the 5 individuals who lost their lives in the bombing of Kirkstall Forge in 1942. And it's something that we are keen to do during the development of the forge, is to really acknowledge the connection that it has with the local community, and also those who've worked there in the past as well. And we'll be looking at other ways to remember those 5 people who died during that bombing.
Yeah, absolutely.
How do you want me to just, sorry, this again, just at the end, oh, sorry, I thought it was on mute, it wasn't. At the end of the Second World War, Kirkstall Forge produced this booklet that went to all of the people who worked in the forge at that time, with a letter from the directors thanking them for their service. And we also have a it's a kind of a thing, I don't know what's called. So anyway, it's from the King, went to all the school children in the area to thank them as well.
The Kings do decrees, don't they? Should we say decrees? A decree from the King.
Is it a decree? It's
I
a
don't know.
decree.
Sounds lauded enough, so yeah, we'll say decree.
A thank you decree from King George, and it's dated the 8th of June 1946.
There we go. Thanks, Lucinda. To bring this part of the presentation to a close, I'm bringing it back to the very beginning of the presentation. So to show you some images. You may well know some of the individuals in this, and if you do, please share what details you can with us, mindful of all the data protection laws that pervade at this time, but nonetheless, again, give you a real feel for individuals who are involved down at the forge, and hopefully some insight as to what life was like. So there's a group of individuals, we have no idea who they are, or indeed where the photographs are taken, other than we're pretty confident they're all at Kirkstall Forge, because when CG took the site over in 2003, they were lucky enough to benefit from an enormous archive, and we must have a couple of thousand of plate glass photographs from the early 1900s. Clearly one of the Butler and Beecroft family, sort of forefathers and foremothers, was a keen photographer, and we've got lots of what look like fairly inane photos of working practice and developments in the industrial manufacturing, to what seem to be almost private collection type photos of jaunts to Buckingham Palace and such like. So here's a selection of a few of those, which just give you a bit of a feel for the individuals who kind of worked down at the forge. And again, if you know any of these faces, then please do get in touch. I think what's striking about this for me is the pride that clearly people felt in what they did down at the forge, and the fact that that still exists to this day. I'll never forget when I first turned up at the site in 2007, and we started to do the demolition. You would have individuals turn up on the doorstep at the gate, looking through, really interested in what we were doing, and asking questions about what was going to happen. And you'd kind of get in conversation with them, and they'd start to tell you about the fact that they were, former members of the stamp shop, or the long shop, or the whatever it might be, dispatch. And it was a really, really significant part of people's lives. They would get individuals who would work there for 40, 50 years plus. And we've done a little exercise into that. If you search Yorkshire Post, the 40 years men, and they were mainly men, those who got to 40 years service at the forge, were presented with a particular medal and they had their photograph taken. So we've got those photos, and with the support of the local community, we managed to identify a lot of those individuals. But we're always looking for more information about the individuals who kind of lived and worked down there.
Harriet, I'll show this book. I don't know if we can multitask and show the book at the same time as the photographs. So this is a book I discovered very recently, actually, which has got all the names of every person who worked at Kirkstall Forge from, I think it's 1948. It's all handwritten. It has their name, their address, their birth date, if they've got children, when they left, when they started working at the forge, what department they were in, the foreman, and also what their particular role was. So I'll just try and hopefully show you a few of the. So it's a ledger that kind of documents everybody who worked at the forge, and it would be great to be able to go through this, matching the names to the photographs that we've got, so that we can make sure these people are remembered properly.
Lovely. Sorry, I'm multitasking again and replying to a few comments in the chat. So I'll just share this again. Yeah, I think just picking up on something that Lucinda said before about the, not benevolence, but the extent to which the custodians of the site, the butlers and beecrofts, other managers and the directors of the site engage with the local community. Anyone who lives on the Hawksworth estate, such as Lucinda, I won't give your home address away, but
everybody knows that, it's fine.
They'll know the impact that the forge has had on the fact that the estate exists. Really is down to the fact that they needed workforce, men and women to come and work on the site, and they predominantly came from the Hawksworth estate and from the other side of the valley in kind of Bramley, and to a lesser extent Lower Horsforth. So yes, enormously significant locally.
And St Mary's Church on Hawksworth Wood was actually built by the Butler family, and I think we've got some of the blueprints. We've got slides actually of the blueprints for the building of St Mary's. So if you ever go to St Mary's Church, keep your eyes open for anything referring to the Butlers.
Yeah, indeed. We're almost back to kind of square one. So just to conclude then, we've rushed through a long period of history in fairly short space of time there. Apologies if we brushed over the piece of history you were particularly focused on. Less to say, in 1974, GKN Axles turn up and take the site off the hands of the Butler and Beecroft family. So from 1779 to 1974, almost 200 years, it was under the custodianship of the Butler and Beecroft families. GKN Axles are superseded in 1995 by Dana Spicer, who are then they effectively sort of strip the site and sell the assets off, and CEG arrive in 2003 and take the site on. And I'll show you a little video now which will give you a bit more of a feel for the site. Again, forever associated with the Abbey, just a little bit down the road. But if you've got your sound on or your headphones in, there is sound with this video, so just be forewarned, it's not too invasive, but this should give you a bit of a feel for what the site was like.
There are few companies which can trace their history back to the 12th century. But here at Kirkstall Abbey, where Cistercian monks settled in that sleepy hamlet 800 years ago, the industry which they developed then still thrives. Originally, they were engaged in the smelting of iron mined from the rich Yorkshire deposits. The monastery was dissolved long ago, but the forge remains. It's been run continuously by locally prominent families as a going concern. expansion and development over the centuries went on to the Industrial Revolution and the production of wheels and axles for the new railway age. Then, after the First World War, the vast development of motor transport brought further expansion. Today, as part of a large engineering group, the Forge is among Britain's biggest producers of agricultural and industrial components. Production and sales have reached new peaks, and a profit increase of around 45% augurs well for the biggest makers of heavy-duty axles in Europe. Justifiably proud of its links with the past, Kirkstall Forge has always kept pace with new developments. Now, equipped with the latest engineering techniques, and by making the best use of technological developments in other industries, it aims to stay ahead. It's a far cry from the pioneer smelting of those 12th century monks, but it looks as though the wheels of progress will be turning here for another 800 years.
Or tellingly not for another 800 years. And that's a nice segue into the future. I know there's been a few comments in the chat around what's proposed. So as I say, CG purchased the site in 2003. That's not an image from 2003, that's from probably 2017. But it does give you a bit of a perspective on the site, again looking to the south, back towards Leeds city centre, which is just on the horizon there. The Abbeydales and kind of the edge of Hawksworth estate on the left hand side of that picture. But you get a indication of the size and scale of the site, and the local landmark, the kink in the air, River Aire, kind of in the foreground, in the middle of the picture there, and the railway line running through the centre of that image. And they're very proud of it. We are as well. Is the first commercial building to be constructed on the site, first office block, which is now fully occupied. So that's the kind of site as it was. Obviously, preceding this photo, we'd come through and done a whole phase of demolition and remediation of the site, cleaned some of the sort of nastier, dirtier areas of the site up, but pleased to say it wasn't too much of that. There's a similar image looking north up towards kind of Horsforth, up the Aire Valley, with much more of the Hawksworth estate. Lucinda's house is somewhere in that picture on the right hand side. Really get the indication of the importance of the transport links and the proximity to the transport links on that site. Yes, we've got the river moving through the middle, the railway line, and then the canal further to the south. As we look at that image, left hand side there, and then obviously on this side is the Abbey Road A65 major road link through to Leeds city centre, and then the other way up to through Horsforth towards Bradford and Skipton. And that is an image of what we're proposing to do. So the intention is that over the next sort of 10 to 15 years, we'll be developing much more office space. So there's another 200,000 thereof square feet of office space to provide, somewhere in the region of 1,200 homes, mixture of apartments and houses, parks, amenity space, shops, cafes, bars, all those things that we've been missing during this period of lockdown as a result of COVID. Hopefully this is one of those areas that when we're allowed to get back to doing all of that stuff in the next few years, we provide the environment to come and do some of that. So you can kind of get a feel there for what's proposed and how that's going to sit within the valley. And here's a few more images. So this is the next phase. It is what I'd refer to as E&F plot. That's a working title, but it's the first residential units on the site that we're hoping. Well, we're on site with the remediation and the civils and infrastructure works now, and hoping to get on site in the not too distant future, later this year.
The plan is to call it Isabella Way after one of the members of the family.
There you go. You know more than I do.
I think so.
And again, someone's asked in the chat about kind of links with the family who are still there. I'm not sure if Tom's on the presentation this evening, but we still have very good links with the family. The cafe down in the office block is called Butler's, and a lot of the names of the roads and buildings that we're going to bring forward will carry that legacy through.
One of the descendants of the Butler family from Butler has actually got an office in the office block, number 1. So he's continuing the legacy of the Butler family on the site. I think we're really keen to acknowledge the role of the Butler and Beecroft families, but we're also wanting to make sure we pay tribute to the workers who worked at Kirkstall Forge as well. So we'll be looking at doing some heritage information boards and such like in the very near future to make sure that it's not just the owners of the site who gets remembered there. It will be also the people who work there.
Yeah, absolutely. So that's again.
Sorry, I noticed there was a question as well around how can people access the ledger and some of the photographs and things that I mentioned. And I'm really happy to in a COVID secure, safe way, meet up with anybody who might want to talk to me, have a look at some of the archive material that we've got, or look at the ledgers, or go through the photographs with me. Just please get in touch. I'm very happy for my contact details to be shared. And if anybody's got a name they want me to look up in the ledger, and this is one ledger, we've got another one back at the office. If anybody wants me to look up a name, please just get in touch as well. I'm really happy for people to come down and talk to us about it. It's great for us to find out and hear stories as well.
Yeah, absolutely. Some select images really of the first residential phase to be constructed, as I say, on site later this year. And first apartments will be available in early 2023, all being well. And I've said that before and been wrong, so don't hold me to it. And a final video, just again to give you a bit of a demonstration as to what's proposed for the future, if it does. I hope you enjoyed that, including the tweeting birds.
Thanks very much, Howard and Lucinda. It was a really excellent talk and great in depth. And you've even managed to answer a lot of the questions as you've gone along as well. Am I right in thinking you've answered the ones you can answer?
No, we answered the ones that I've chanced upon more than anything, Mark. So let's go through them if you wish.
Yeah, I only answered the ones I saw, so I've not seen them all.
Right,
so.
okay. We'll quickly go through some, because Right. I know there was one, or you answered about the dam not being in existence.
Yeah.
There's one about monks hiking up to Middleton Park to mine for coal. I don't know if you know if that's true or not.
Well, I don't know about how they got there. They definitely went to Halton to obtain raw materials. I think it was actually wrought iron rather than coal, but I might be wrong on that. And there's lots of, again, first-hand documentary evidence of links with coal mine that was purchased when the Butler and Beecroft family first took the, oh no, forgive me, it was the Spencer Dickin partnership, who were the partnership who had the site immediately prior to the Butler and Beecroft family, who bought a coal seam mine, I think it was open cast mine, up past Tong Village, kind of out toward Gilderson, which is to the south, sort of west of Leeds as you're heading out beyond Pudsey towards Bradford. So there's lots of, again, local links. One of the major constraints on the industrial manufacture of the site was its ability to obtain good quality supplies of raw materials. So they were forever looking for opportunities to address those constraints they worked under. So I can't answer the supposition around monks walking up to Halton, but there were definitely links with those parts of kind of Greater West Yorkshire.
Okay, Andy suggested Betty Beecroft should have a statue, but has also asked if you've had contact with the local heritage railways at Keighley and Worth Valley and Middleton.
Yeah, we have at Middleton. We've reached out to both, I think, Keighley and Middleton, and we've engaged with York. So they're all kind of part of the conversation at the moment. We haven't found that expert who's able to kind of come and refurbish the crane as yet. But again, if there's anyone out there who feels ready, willing, and able, then do get in touch.
Brian asked if there was any
statue.
Oh, yes.
We've been having talks with the Civic Trust about making sure we can get a blue plaque for Betty at the site. Right. And I'm also working with a couple of councillors on a project called Leeds Forgotten Women, which is inspired by Betty, because they're kind of fed up of listening to me talk about Betty. We started a project only a few weeks ago to try and track as many of the women in Leeds history who made a remarkable impact to the history of Leeds, but may not have had the attention they would have done if they were men. So it's if anybody wants to get involved with that, please let us know.
Okay, Brian asks, was there a problem with flooding? And also somebody who asked if it was affected by the bombing in 1941.
I'll take those. So the latter one, no, it wasn't affected by the bombing in 1941 to the best of our knowledge. It was the 1942 August 27th incident that affected the forge directly. In terms of flooding, it has had problems in the past, and some of those problems go way back to 1860s. That caused a major sort of commercial challenge for the site all those years ago. I'm pleased to say latterly, as a result of the works that have undertaken on the site, the flooding risk has been addressed. Prior to those works in 2015, the site did get a bit wet, it's fair to say, when we had those significant rainstorms of kind of Boxing Day and the day after Boxing Day of 2015. Since then, there's a couple of things happened. Basically, wherever we're building the buildings, they're set at a flood level which is beyond the 125-year flood warning zone. Now, there's often a lot of supposition about what flood levels actually mean, and the environment, as everyone will be aware, is changing so readily that you can challenge those, I think. So what we've done in addition to that is also construct what we call the flood relief channel, which is a 25-metre wide piece of civil engineering, which effectively addresses the particular pinch point on the site. And I should say it's nothing to do with us, but what we have on the site is the rail bridge that crosses the air is set too low and effectively acts as a dam. So it captures all the debris coming down the river and then allows the river to back up, which has caused the issues in the past. So instead of that happening now, what we do is divert a little corner of the river so that that hold-up no longer takes place, and as a result, the flood risk on the site is mitigated.
Okay, thanks. Jane is asking, how was the dam formed? Was it a diversion of the river air or smaller becks?
Smaller becks predominantly. There was an offtake. So if you go to Pollard Lane, the Pollard Bridge that crosses the river air just up from the Forge site, so it's not within our kind of demise, but there's an offtake there which came directly from the river air and crossed Cow Beck, which must have been a piece of engineering in and of itself, and entered the site there and then ran along a goit and filled the dam. The dam was also filled from what I know as the mill race, which ran off Cow Beck, also known as Oil Mill Beck, which again, for anyone who lives in and around Hawksworth, Lower Horsforth, I should say, is the beck that runs through that part of town.
All right, thank you. Jackie and Bob were asking what kind of war work they did in World War One, and but particularly did they do any business with the Barnbow shell filling factory near Crossgate?
I think in World War One was predominantly transport manufacture, so making vehicles effectively for use. So I don't think they did munitions during World War One. The munitions link, and there was inevitably some link with Barnbow during the Second World War, where the Forge did make fairly small scale and limited in number munitions casings. It was mainly transport through both of the war periods.
Catherine mentioned her granddad worked there during World War One, that he was an immigrant from Ireland, and she wondered were there a lot of similar immigrants attracted to working there at that time? Do we know?
Yes, huge numbers. Go on, Lucinda, you go for it if you want.
I huge numbers. Steal the story that you told me, so
no, you go for it. Go on, you do it. No, I can't remember that story now, so please.
I think when the bombing in 1942 took place, the foreman of the time went to all the funerals of the 5 men that perished, and he commented on the diversity of that group. And I don't know if one of them was one of them Jewish, but there was a whole cross section of people at that time, and that was really kind of demonstrated through him attending those 5 funerals.
Yeah.
Okay. John Harris says, how long did the internal railway operate?
Yeah, we're not sure on that dates wise. It was clearly post 1835 when it was enacted, and it was almost certainly gone by the 1960s, but we're not sure on that. So if anyone's got any insight as to the specific dates on the railway, do tell us. There's some horrific stories around the use of the railway line internal to the site. You can imagine working in those dark, dusty, noisy environments, coming out of the installation you were working in, and falling foul of the railway infrastructure that was kind of pervading around the site. There's some fairly gruesome tales that we've come across on that. So yeah, it's not always the happiest of stories when you start talking about the internal railway line, but we would love to know more details about it. It did certainly used to run up to what is now the Burley Rugby Club. There's a railway line. Anyone who's walked through the woodland up there, adjacent to the rugby club, there is a line in the mud, in the footpath that runs along that area, which the rugby ground itself used to be the tip to the site, so would be where they take all the risings from the site to dispose of them.
Debbie asks, do you feel that your original plans have been affected by the pandemic?
Only so much as it slowed us down. I think the general intention is still to deliver the master plan as it was prior to this. We're great believers that commercial space, residential space, we take a very design-led approach to what we're delivering down there, and we feel that that's the right thing to do for Kirkstall Forge as a site. You know, of office space, I think that's probably where the question is coming from primarily, but office space exists for a reason, and we're fervent believers that that need hasn't gone away. It's been affected clearly temporarily while they deal with the impact of COVID-19, but you know, it's evolved for a reason, and that reason's still there. So we've got to situate ourselves in the best possible place to capitalize on that as and when we're able to start letting again.
And I think it's important that you do look at what's happening and with the current pandemic. And I know the planning application that we had in and that was granted very recently for the first phase of development, the designers did think about how did COVID impact people working from home, and actually put in more external space as a response to that. So I think it has absolutely right. It has slowed us down, but it's also important to learn some lessons from what's happening to make sure that the design is the best it can be and is appropriate to everybody in the new world, whatever that may look like.
Okay, thank you. Andy asks if how do the existing row cottages fit into the new plans?
Good question. Currently, should I say, on the master plan, they're intended to be residential properties, so we'll convert them into duplex housing, duplex apartments of some nature. Caveat to that, and picking up on a point that Catherine's made, we have had some discussions with a local brewery, whose name you may well be able to guess, around potentially turning them into a pub. When you look at the front facade of those buildings, they scream pub to you. And who knows, he might have the Betty Beecroft Arms down there at some stage, but she wasn't a drinker, so we've got to proceed with caution, I think, around that.
Yeah, somebody called Galaxy Tab A. In 1890s, you mentioned that the Butler Beecrofts purchased the site from the Cardigans. How much did they pay?
I do know that, but I don't know that off the top of my head, so forgive me, whoever raised that question. Great question. If you want to, I will get in touch somehow, post this. I'm more than willing to share what I know. Yeah, it's in that red book. So the book that Lucinda's got, one of our primary sources for this is the history of Kirkstall Forge, which is a tome written by one of the Butler family. And that's got the details in there, but off the top of my head, I'd be struggling.
Okay. Yeah, Janet mentions Horsforth Museum, I think. The
Yes.
Village Museum. Wondered if you'd had connections with that, which I suspect you have.
We have indeed, yeah. Lucinda's forever engaging with Horsforth, with Army Mills, with Leeds City Museum. I mean, there's a requirement upon us. The archive that we've got, certainly the archive we derived from the archaeological works, we are duty bound to share and display those artifacts, and some of that, the bits that we're not able to retain on site and make use of, will be going to the local museum network to aid in that display.
Okay.
I was due to go down to Horsforth Museum quite before the pandemic struck, so I'll be getting back in touch to organise a visit.
Yeah. Okay, that's the end of the questions. So thanks very much once again. If anyone else has got anything else they want to ask, then they can get in touch with the Trust. And thank you for all your help tonight.
Absolute pleasure. Hope you all enjoyed it, and whilst and when we're allowed to, we look forward to meeting and greeting you all down at the Forge at the earliest opportunity. And thanks to the Civic Trust for hosting us this evening.
Yeah, thank you. And if there is anybody who would like to get more involved in the work we're doing around heritage, you know, we're really keen to get members of the community involved. So please get in touch.
Oh, okay, and with that, it's good night, everyone.
Thank
Thanks,
you.
Mark. Thanks all.